Well, it's good to be back with you. Funny thing, I have been waiting to make this video for some time, and I've also have other ideas that come to me as time passes. And I've noticed that probably realistically speaking, I'd be better off just making sure I made a video every week rather than forgetting half the stuff I want to talk about because, just because there's so many things going on in my head all the time. And I want to mention thank you for those that have read my science fiction book called Pyramids of Time and have made kind remarks on it. As you well know, just from reading it, I poured my heart and soul into that, the creation of that novel, if you will, and spent a lot of time having it edited by my wife, my oldest daughter, and I actually paid a professional to give me some tips on how to correct a few things here and there. So yeah, there's a lot of work in that. But the thing I wanted to talk about today is dealing with the concept between, and I'm going to hatch it the way it's pronounced, I'm sure, but there's a thing called, if you drop the A off of Dvaita, it would be Dvaita, and that is duality. And that was originally taught by some guru scholar in India back in, and his name was Madhva, and he lived back in the year like close to 1300, right in that time frame. Madhva, I guess, is the name, and that's as opposed to Adi Shankara, who lived before him and taught non-duality. So I think how I want to address this is those two oppose each other. And so I was reading the other day how Madhva was, shall I say, violently opposed to the teachings of non-duality by Adi Shankara. And as well as you know, I am of the same feelings as Madhva that taught non-duality. Or duality, if you will. So I want to put those two together rather than because as you well know, I have voiced my negativity towards non-duality ever since I started this video channel of mine, expressly to argue against the teachings of non-duality. Madhva said the exact same thing, and he pretty much said he felt like Adi Shankara was a demon, if you will, teaching demonic teachings. And of course, I feel the same exact way. So how am I going to put this together where I am no longer taking the stance that Adi Shankara is an evil demon teaching demonic things to pervert the truth of reality? How am I going to put that together, and how am I going to do that? Well, that's what I'm going to attempt to do right now. Two more commercials, if you will. One is please forgive me if I say the same thing in different ways multiple times. My wife and my oldest brother have mentioned this to me many times and said, John, people are not retarded. They are not stupid. And if they're listening to what you teach, they're definitely on the upper echelon of intelligence. Otherwise, they wouldn't understand what you're saying anyway. So don't keep hammering away at the same thing 10,000 different ways. That may be true. And excuse me, that is true, because I'm not denying what my wife says, nor my older brother. However, I have a problem, and that is when I'm trying to express these incredibly difficult concepts to grasp, spiritually speaking, I can say it crystal clear. And the other person would respond to me, and I know they don't understand. And I spoke it crystal clear, and still they don't understand. My wife has great experience with that, and meaning I can try to express something to her numerous times, and she just doesn't get it. And I honestly believe she's more intelligent than I am. So there's that to deal with. And that's, I guess I'm defending the reason I am so boring in that I discuss the same thing from 1,000 different facets and angles. I'm doing it because I'm hoping with all hope that you'll get the truth. Because the things I am teaching, damn near everything I'm teaching, is completely different than what you have been taught your entire life. It's completely different from what you read in the scriptures and the Bhagavad Gitas and the Vedas and everything. And why is it completely different? It's completely different because I'm teaching it correctly. I am teaching it the way it should have been taught. I am not arguing that what the Bible has in it is evil and it's created by Satan, although I've said that many times. I'm not saying that the Vedas and Bhagavad Gitas and all these things, I'm not saying that they are totally corrupt and evil and misprinted, even though I've said that numerous times too. But what I am saying is they are misinterpreted. And the way they are written, they were misinterpreted by the authors who wrote those things, because the authors that wrote those things are not the original prophets or gurus or saints or what. They're not the original ones. You are not ever getting the original writings from the original author or prophet or seer or whatever. You're getting what someone else remembers that person said. For instance, Jesus never wrote anything down that we have, and yet we have an entire religion based upon what Jesus said, and yet we have zero written words from Jesus. And clearly there are no tape recordings from 2,000 years ago. So we have absolutely nothing other than the interpretation of what other people have. Now, can you know exactly what Jesus said? Certainly you can, but you're not going to know it from reading Bibles and everything. What you're going to do is you're going to read Bibles, and then you're going to importune the God of this reality, and you're going to ask, what does that mean? How am I going to understand that correctly? Please help me to understand that. And that deity, if you will, the Brahma or maybe angelic forces that you are working with, whatever, they can actually help you to understand the original thoughts and meanings and words of what Jesus spoke. But you're not going to get it from the books. And that's why it's very frustrating trying to teach spirituality because I'm going up against people with PhDs in spirituality, PhDs in religion and everything. And they know these books and these Vedas and all these things a hell of a lot more than I will ever know in my lifetime. And so can I argue with them, or can I stand toe to toe with them and compete with I don't even know the proper words. For me, the way I differ is it's like I grew up with dyslexia and having one hell of a time trying to read. Hell, I was in my 20s before I was able to go ahead and read fluently enough where I could kind of understand. I had to self-teach myself how to read, for crying out loud, because of that. And so I spent a lifetime dealing with that, and what little I could glean from teachers or scriptures or whatever, I had to go to the source, meaning God, meaning Brahma, to get clarification. And I did. I spent a lot of time on my knees praying to this deity. I spent a lot of time laying in my bunk at the fire department, studying and praying and going, I don't understand this. Please help me understand. So then you fast forward 30 plus years or 40 years, and now it's like, okay, now I have an understanding. It's way more complete. But the thing is, I don't have the correct words. And so now I have to go back and study. And when I say the correct words, it's like the teacher Madhava, which teaches Dvaita, which is duality. The first time I heard about this teacher and Dvaita, the first time I heard that was probably, I don't know, 6 years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. And so all that told me was I knew someone in the world, there was a religion or a faith or a teaching that taught something along that line. But likewise, you can't really find anything. If there is a following of this particular person in India, it certainly hasn't spread to the rest of the world because, the reason it hasn't spread to the rest of the world is because it's actually more along lines of truth. And the only thing that spreads throughout the world is trash, garbage, and evil teachings. And Advaita, meaning non-duality, is evil. And when I say evil, it is incorrectly understood and taught incorrectly. So I've had to go through and learn the words of the proper words that coincide with what I've already know to be the truth, that I've been taught directly from God to try to understand these things. So that's where I'm coming from. Now, how am I going to put these two gurus together in such a way that I'm not denigrating either one, and I'm saying that they're actually both right? And that's what I have found to be true throughout my last decade of spiritual understandings and readings and everything, is surprisingly, you find a hell of a lot of truth in every single teaching. I mean, you can study Native American Indian folklore, if you will, and if you could integrate the things from that into Hinduism and or this or that or whatever, it too is very closely aligned with the truth, if you will, spiritual truth of reality. And you're going to find that throughout the world in all legitimate teachings. But they're all incomplete too. Every single one is incomplete. I don't give a darn which one you're talking about. They are all incomplete, and they are all missing many, many parts that would make it whole, they are missing. And so you can either take them all in totality and try to understand what reality is, and you'll come a hell of a lot closer than studying just one faith or one religion, but still you're going to fall short. There is no way, and I'm telling you right now, there is no way to understand it in totality correctly without you being taught directly from God. And when you're taught directly from God, you may not even know you're being taught from God. In most cases, that's the way it works. In most cases, you will be asking God for help and understanding and everything, and you might be reading a passage and everything, and it's like, oh, that's what it means. Oh man, I've been looking for that forever and ever and ever. And you attribute your truth to the passages that you happen to be reading. And then you you don't cross-check it 3-4 weeks later or a month later, because you already know what you read and you know what the truth is. So you don't go back to check it out. And if you do, you miss it. I personally have not experimented, but I have done this, and this would happen to you too. So for instance, what I did one time was, and I told you this story before, but I was reading in a book and I go, oh my gosh, I was actually at the fire department on that particular date, and I was reading in a book that I was studying at the time, and I had a yellow highlighter and an underliner and everything, and I was marking it, and a couple pages I went through doing that, going, oh my God, I've been searching for this truth for a decade or more, and I finally found it, and I'm just so grateful. And then I went home afterwards and told my wife about it, and she said, wow, could you bring your book home and show me? Because I'd like to find that too. And I said, certainly. And so the next shift, I brought the book home. Of course, I looked at the fire department when I was there, and I couldn't discover where it was, and I didn't understand what was going on. But I brought the book home anyways, and I showed my wife, and sure enough, there's the yellow highlighting. Sure enough, there's the underlining. Sure enough, it's all there. But it doesn't mean what I read. And it's just superfluous bullshit. It just really was nothing but normal, standard stuff. It didn't mean really anything. And I was just baffled. I was actually hurt to the point where it's like, how is this possible? I mean, it was less than a week ago. I just read this, and all the knowledge was still up here that I had read, but it just wasn't there. And I looked and looked and looked, and it wasn't there, even though the highlighting. So that's one way God can teach you. But how would you ever know that happened if you didn't underline it and highlight it, and then go back a week or two later and go, you wouldn't think to do that. So what I'm telling you is, if you understand the truth and you understand it in such a way that it's very, very, very maybe different than everyone else understand it, but you understand it, and you understand it because you remember hearing it, reading it, or whatever. The fact of the matter is, since you don't go back and check it, you don't know. Maybe you've been taught by God and you have no clue. And you're never going to know, because you're never going to go back and check and do that kind of stuff like I did. So there's that. So getting on with the story. This is how I put it together. Let's say they're both right. Let's say Adi Shankara is correct in his teachings of non-duality, and let's say Madhva is correct in his teachings of duality. Now, I know they're both opposite of each other, but I'm going to assume that they are both correct. Now, here's how I'm going to do this. Now, the better part of me, because I have thought this for the past decade, that Adi Shankara actually was a demonic teacher, and he had pride and arrogance and everything else. And how could he possibly be as smart and aware as Madhva? Because Adi Shankara, I mean, his whole life consisted of being born, growing up as a teenager, blah, blah, blah. And he died at what? Was it 23, 24 years old or something? Whereas Madhva lived to be like 79 years old. So it's hard to compete with that. I mean, he was just a kid, Adi Shankara. So, I mean, he didn't have, how do you have wisdom? How do you have that when you're that young? Now, when you're that young, you may think you have wisdom, but if you don't die and you live to be 60, 70 years old, you'll look back and say, oh no, I didn't have wisdom. 100% of all people will do that. And if they don't do that, they're ignorant fools and they have no wisdom now. So I am going to, rather than argue against Adi Shankara, instead I'm going to say that since he died, what was it, 1,200 years ago, 1,400 years ago, or however long it's been, since he died, and clearly shortly after he died, his followers didn't understand, and they taught non-duality, whereas Adi Shankara wasn't really teaching the concept of non-duality. And I can believe that. And why can I believe that? Because the concept of non-duality stems from, it is mentioned a lot of times, Adi Shankara was not using the name Brahma as the deity of the source of non-duality, but instead he used the word Brahman, which isn't a god. Brahman is not a god. I've talked about this in other videos. Brahman is nothing more than the dark, unorganized, unintelligent nothingness of which everything emanates from. But you even can't say that, because here's what happens. You have right here our brains and our minds and our spirits, and including everything right up to Shiva, the word God, meaning God, Brahma, everything. In this aspect of reality is physical, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, and it is 100% based upon a foundation created by Brahma. But before Brahma, you're into Brahman. But what is Brahman? You cannot say Brahman is physical or spiritual or anything, because it is a no existence is the way it's put. Darkness, because there's no light, there's no love, there's nothing, and yet it is the source of everything, including Brahma, Jesus, Shiva. It's like you go from this realm to a realm where the realm of Brahman, there's no God, there's no gods, there's no 1 + 1 = 2, there's nothing. So if Adi Shankara was saying everything is one, because he's looking at Brahman and saying, well, you cannot divide Brahman, because Brahman is just one thing. And since everything emanates from Brahman, then everything is non-dual. But the problem with that is that is nothingness. You are more than nothingness. Your essence came from Brahman, which is nothingness, but since it responded to the light of God or the love of God, it created itself into the bosom, if you will, of Brahma. And And now you exist within an awareness of Brahman. Now you could say, well, and so from Madhva's perspective, he's arguing against Adi Shankara because he's saying, no, 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 no. Just like me, saying your essence constitutes duality because it is sovereign from Brahma. It is sovereign. You can be one with Brahma. You can be one with God. You can be one with Jesus. But that doesn't mean you are one. Like, for instance, you can take an atom of gold and you can take another atom of gold and you can put a bunch of them together and have a gold brick. But there's no such thing as a gold brick. There is only atoms of gold. Just because you put a bunch of them together doesn't mean it's one. You can say it's one brick, but that's a construct of a mental faculty trying to make sense of a whole bunch of atoms. But a whole bunch of atoms doesn't really exist. The only thing that exists is the atom. And when you have two gold atoms and a whole bunch of them, you have a gold brick. And so you could mistakenly say, well, see, the gold brick is just one indivisible thing. But it is divisible. There's numerous atoms of gold in that brick. And like the concept in Christianity says, no unclean thing will inhabit the kingdom of God. And that's because if you say gold, for instance, you're not going to have an atom of iron in the brick of gold. Otherwise, the brick of gold would be impure. And God is pure. So if you're going to become one with God, you have to create yourself into something that is absolutely 100% identical to Brahma. And if Brahma is an atom of gold, you have to convert yourself into an atom of gold if you are going to be one with God. Now, if you dig deeper into the atomic structure, well, you could say, well, if you take a point in time and you've got electrons circling it, well, this gold atom, the electrons are on the right side, whereas this one, the electrons are on the right side, this one's on the left side. So they're not identical, and yet they are identical. So for instance, you take and you're going to be one with God. Okay, so you're one with God. Does that make you identical to God? Well, in a sense it does, because you're both gold atoms, but maybe God doesn't like chocolate ice cream and you do. Oh, there's nothing evil in not liking chocolate ice cream. Who cares? That just means there's a variety in the kingdom of heaven, and yet everything is one. There's no, let's put it this way, there's no evil argument between people in the kingdom of heaven, if you will, or the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of Brahma. And if you become one with God, then you are identical to God in the fact that your essence, whatever your essence develops into, is identical to God. And then you, well, I don't want to say endure because I don't like the word endure, but you will pleasantly be in full joy for all eternity with God, with Brahma. Why? Because Brahma, or God, will never cease to exist. Now, if you study the ancient Hindu teachings, they'll say, well, actually Brahma does cease to exist eventually because he only lives to be, I can't remember, but let's say 100 trillion years old. He lives through 100 kalpas of time or whatever, and then he dies. Well, but think about that. There again is another misinterpretation of the truth. They go, well, he ceases to exist. Well, do you cease to exist when you die? Of course not. When you die, you're reborn again. You understand that. Just because your life happens to be 100 years and then you die of old age and then you're reborn again, and it's the same you that's born into another physical body. How is that any different from Brahma? Just because Brahma may die at 100 trillion years old, does that mean he's not going to be born again as the exact same individual? No, of course it means that that's what the case is. It doesn't mean Brahma ceases to exist, and it doesn't mean you cease to be one with Brahma for all eternity if you make yourself into being exactly like Brahma. So Adi Shankara is correct in saying he was trying to explain Dvaita from Vedanta, meaning the entirety of the Vedas. And he was trying to explain this to people, and the people cannot understand it. It is too difficult for the brain to comprehend the nature of Brahman. It is too difficult. Now, is it too difficult for me to understand it? No. But why? Why is it not too difficult for me to understand? Because God blessed me because I asked for decades, and through I don't even want to say revelation, because you can't understand this stuff with a revelation. It is like enlightenment. You cannot become enlightened through the process of revelation. You have to become enlightened through the process of enlightenment. I don't know how else to explain it. It's like a paradigm is the closest word I can come up with. So I think I'm going to cut it short at this time. I know that's a quick, abrupt end, but I don't want to explain it 100 times differently. I just want to drop it there. So lastly, I'll say that one more time. If I'm not going against them, and if I'm going on the assumption that both Madhava and Adi Shankara are both righteous and not evil, and they both had a message, except for it's easier to understand the concept that Madhava was teaching in reality, which is duality. It's easier to understand that, except for the fact that you can't even understand that in its proper context if you don't understand the nature of Brahman. And you cannot understand the nature of Brahman without being enlightened. There's no way to understand it. I mean, yeah, conceptually you can kind of grasp it, but you're never going to understand it. So when I teach you and when I express these things to you, that I know these things to be true. I know them to be true, not because I can go in some scripture or Veda and say, see, this is what it says. I can't do it that way, but I can get close to saying see, but the minor little pieces that you need to make it click in your head, they have to come directly from God. And the only way that's going to happen is if you importune and ask God. And when it does happen, then you will be enlightened. And when you're enlightened, you too will be tasked with trying to express and explain things that are impossible to understand without being accompanied with enlightenment. So, I hope I didn't say the same thing 100 times this time, differently. I love you. I really hope in these horrible, difficult times throughout the world with spirituality. I really hope that, since you're watching me, I really hope that, and I even pray that God would help you to understand these things too, because you're trying to understand these things. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching these videos. You're trying to understand things that you cannot understand from reading books and Bibles and stuff like that. And one thing I have noticed in the last little over 10 years, the one thing that I have noticed that was really different from my first 35 years of studying spirituality was that it's like if you go to church and everything, I'm not saying the people are stupid, but there's a different level of dedication, if you will. And most people, I don't know why, but they're not really dedicated. Let's put it that way. They're more interested in the world or whatever. And they rise to a certain level and then they go, I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that. But one of the things I've noticed in the last decade when I used to go to Sangha and different Sanghas that I went to, one in Portland and one here in Las Vegas, for the most part, the people that attend are of a very high intellectual character, if you will. It was surprising to me, let's put it that way. Not the standard walk of life people. You would think they're just normal people when you go up and talk to them and stuff like that in the Sangha group and everything. But then you get to know them a little better. And these are people that are doctors, have PhDs, incredibly intelligent people. So, and why is that? I don't know. I think because maybe they get bored with the standard stuff that you learn from normal groups and everything. But when you go into these higher spiritual teachings and stuff, it really appeals to those types of people that, well, I guess not only intellectually they are, but they apply themselves. And maybe that's why. I don't know. I know one thing. Some of the young guys that I communicate with on email level, they are smarter than I am. I mean, they're enrolled in universities and colleges and all that kind of stuff, and very smart individuals. The difference between them and me is they're just younger than me, and I suspect they will gain a greater knowledge than I have if they stay on the path and everything. It'll come in due course of time. Just don't be frustrated. Well, I can't say don't be frustrated because you will be frustrated, but just stick with it and have extreme patience. You have to have patience with God because God, I'd like to say never because I think that's accurate. God never gives you blessings based upon your wants. I mean, you can whine and complain and cry and study and pray endlessly and on and on and on. And it's like, why the hell isn't God answering me? And 20 years go by and of course most people throw in the towel. But I have noticed that God is very, 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 very reluctant to step in such a way where there's absolutely no confusion whether or not God has intervened on your behalf. So you just need to be patient, and then somebody like me, I'm in a situation where when I'm talking to you, I tell you I'm telling you the truth. I tell you that I have had direct communications with Brahma. I tell you I've had direct input, probably, when I say probably from Jesus because, I don't know, I've never shook his hand or anything, but I have recognized a spiritual infusion of strength, spiritually, knowledge and wisdom that could only be, you know what the word deja vu is? So that occurs sometimes. And it's like, so I'm reading something and it's like this deja vu type thing. And it's like, well, you can't have deja vu about something that occurred 2,000 years ago. And yet I do sometimes. And it's like, okay, well, then if that's happening, then it's miraculous from Jesus, or else I was with Jesus at the time, and I certainly don't remember being with Jesus. And yet I have deja vu sometimes in certain circumstances like that. So what I provide for you is an individual that is different than anyone in the world at this time right now, as far as I can tell, that is telling you directly, God to me, to you. And so you are tasked with the concept of going, well, I'm trying to understand what this guy is saying, but at the same time, when I say I'm, meaning I'm pretending I'm you, I have to go, is he lying to me? Is he telling me the truth? Does he know what he's talking about? Well, if you don't know that I know what I'm talking about, you're an idiot and a fool because you don't know anything. You're too wet behind the ears or something because I know what I'm talking about. But you have to ask yourself, is he lying? Is he a demon? Because what I teach is so vastly different from what most people teach, and incredibly in depth. So that's what I provide for you. And I tell you, because I truly mean it, if you're one with God, I'm one with God, I love you. And I will always love you for all eternity. Because if I didn't, I wouldn't be one with God. So am I excited about spirituality, the teachings that absolutely. It's exhilarating beyond all imagination. Spiritual enlightenment. It is bizarre, to say the least, to be coexisting in multiple realms simultaneously. It is difficult to handle if you haven't been doing it for several years. So I love you, and I hope you got something out of this. And just stick with it. Keep going. And for any of you that I did send my science fiction novel, Pyramids of Time, just to let you know, you're free to share it with anyone you want. It's a PDF, so you're welcome to share it with anyone. I don't care. I'm not going to. I just don't care. It's free, whatever. Thank you for watching. You have a good day. Bye.